updates generally about the program, what we've been working on. So I shared in the last meeting that following the flooding, we had brought together a group to talk about outdoor recreation and flood recovery. That group has been meeting since July, and as a reminder, we had come together and our first task was to develop messages about recreating outside safely following the flooding. We quickly turned to a damage assessment of the outdoor recreation in Vermont, trying to get an idea of the extent of impacts to outdoor recreation around the state. We are at a point now where we've completed that damage assessment, and we do have some information that we're working on compiling and sharing out, including sharing out to A&R and ACCD leadership. So you may see some more from me about the outcomes of those conversations as we move forward.
Who's on that?
So that is, so there is, let me see. So VTGC, Vermont Trails and Greenways Council, Vermont Outdoor Business Alliance, the Department of Marketing and Tourism has been involved. We have representation from the Forest Service. We have state land staff coming to those meetings. And we have the Vermont Recreation and Parks Association. Jessica comes to those meetings. Claire is a part of that meeting, and the Vermont Housing to Conservation Board are all part of those meetings. So it's been really great to bring all of those different folks together and talk about how recovery is going, what different people are doing. You know, we've learned a lot, like VOBA has been providing like short-term funding for flood recovery of outdoor recreation assets to their chapters. And, you know, gotten, thanks to some survey work that VOBA and VTGC and BRPA did, they put out surveys broadly to their networks and then did a lot of work following up with people one-on-one. So that gave us a lot of information back. I would say, you know, it's probably not as detailed or like cohesive as it's hard to get that from individual organizations and staff, but it has given us, I think, a good broad understanding of the damage that occurred out the recreation spaces across Vermont.
Are those findings being reported upward into the administration? Is there a mechanism for that?
Yeah, we're sharing them out. So the most recent opportunity is that the secretary is giving, she's talking about the flood recovery work that FPR has done today, right now, actually, at the Ault staff meeting, which is happening this morning. And we did share some talking points with her about all of the work we did to bring together outdoor recreation, land managers, recreation providers, all of those folks, and then some of the key data points, which I'm happy to share out with you all. I thought, you know, maybe sending you a memo with some details about what came out of that assessment would be useful.
We had early figures that went to the congressional delegation through our secretary as well. So he was able to share some of the early findings from it.
Right.
And then the secretary has passed them up to the governor's office through the weekly updates that we provide.
Yeah, and we also shared some information with Heather's a participant in that group. She's been involved in those conversations, and I know Heather and ACCD have done their own work around economic injury and getting a better understanding of that as well, which I think Heather will share a little bit about in a few minutes.
I'd ask a follow-up just around the type of data that was collected. Is it mostly expense? Is it other footprint of how would you describe the data set?
It's mostly like fun, you know, like, yeah, mostly financial is the most cohesive information we have, like estimates on like how much the cost is. We do have some more like detailed information, but it's not, and it's been hard to get like things like how many trails exactly, or how many bridges, or, you know, I think the most I've been able to break out is damage to like outdoor recreation access roads versus like just outdoor recreation spaces and assets.
And just to be, and you were VOREC, or the VOREC program is the key convener.
VOREC with FPR
Right.
partnership. Yeah. Great.
It's actually wonderful what,
I think there would be interest in that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, totally.
Julie's staff meeting that's happening right now is actually, she's using the opportunity to really commend VOREC and FPR for the work that we did in flood response and recovery. There were several other sort of sectors that we represent with our work that we're looking to the recreation providers that were convening immediately following and organizing and sharing resources that Julie is sharing with folks and saying, you know, look to the recreation community for how well they collaborated to follow the flood. Which is really exciting. Yeah.
And that group is going to continue to meet. We decided at our last meeting that we're going to switch to a less frequent schedule of meetings, but we will be meeting once a month. We have talked about next steps being coordinating on maybe some conversation around like the resilience, like how do we do better? Like what things do we need to do to build better resiliency on the ground with like trails and parks and those kinds of recreational assets? It's still, we need to sort of float that idea up the chain and within FPR to determine if that's like a good use of convening this group. Just knowing that we have this ongoing 30 by 30 process, like what are the opportunities there? So, but the idea is that this group will continue meeting monthly, moving forward. Great. So some national updates. I was able to go to the Outdoor Economy Summit in North Carolina in September, along with Kelly, and Drew was there as well. It was a really exciting event. The confluence of states used it as an opportunity to hold a bunch of meetings together, talk about our agenda and goals for the upcoming year. I think the big theme, though, was exploring partnerships with other national level organizations. So the confluence met with the statewide Outdoor Business Alliance Network, which Kelly is a key leader in. And we also met with prospective states who are working on establishing offices of outdoor recreation through the National Governors Association. And those were really interesting meetings as well, just learning how other states are pulling together offices, what they're finding challenging. So really good, interesting conversations there. And if you're interested in talking about that, please feel free to pull me aside today or send me an email.
Just to be clear for people who have an eye on budget, Kelly and I were self-funded attendees. She was not. Just to be clear.
Yeah.
I'm looking for my VOREC proposal.
Exactly.
Yes, not as VOREC representatives. So the other meeting we had was with Luis Benitez, who some of you are probably familiar with. He was the first director for the Colorado office, which was established, I don't even know how many years ago, but it was, I think, the second office to be established. Utah was the first. And right now, if you haven't heard, he's pushing for federal office of outdoor recreation within the Commerce Department. And so we met with him to understand a little bit more about that proposal and what he's working on.
Let me go quick tag on.
Yeah.
So that was just, he's been on the Trust Public Lands National Board of Directors for the last few years, and he's posted the BF Foundation. But just this week, we announced that he is moving to become a staff member at National Public Land as our chief impact officer. So it's good for us, and it's very big shapes.
That's very exciting.
Yeah. Yes, and I think he's gonna be in Maine.
Yeah.
In a couple of weeks, not maybe a month or two.
And no, it's very exciting.
Speaking in sort of his prior capacity about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm glad that finished.
yeah, it was a really interesting conversation, and again, like, if you want to talk about that, please feel free to reach out or look aside. I'm happy to share more information. So the Confluence also elected new leadership. We elected, Catherine, oh my gosh, I didn't write down her name and I knew I would forget. So from Arkansas, the director of Arkansas, is the new chair of the Confluence, and for the vice chair position, Carol-Ann Willett is staying at the vice chair position from Maine. And then finally, Pennsylvania, who established a new office of outdoor recreation just a few months ago, was voted into the Confluence of States. So we welcome Pennsylvania into the Confluence. Other national level news. So ahead of our next meeting, I encourage you all to be keeping an eye out for the next release of the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Their outdoor recreation satellite account is doing a release of what would that be, 2022 data. It's expected to be pretty large. For rumors that it could show outdoor recreation as $1 trillion sector in 2022, which is huge. It's at 862 billion for 2021. So that is going to be pretty exciting if it does show that, and I'm sure you'll see a lot of messaging about that. Kelly and I have been talking about collaborating on a press release like we did last year. So yeah, more to come. All right, regional work. So sorry, I have a lot of updates today. There's a lot happening. I will try and be brief because we have other folks. But we, as some of you might know, Massachusetts established an Office of Outdoor Recreation. There's been a lot of conversation about holding a regional event to welcome the Massachusetts office into the New England, sort of collaboration with Offices of Outdoor Recreation, which is really exciting. They have a new director. We're talking about doing that in mid-December, around December 14th. And then we've also been continuing to plan for the Northern Forest Outdoor Economy Summit, which is in mid-May next year. You should all be receiving an invite to that event pretty soon. All VOREC steering committee members were included on sort of this first invite pass. There will be more invitations going out as we move forward with planning. But we are at a point where the invite list is coming together. The workshops for that meeting are coming together. And I think what I can share right now is we're thinking about those conversations happening in kind of 3 discussion areas. And those include community, industry, and policy and resources. So that's kind of how we're framing the workshops that will be happening. Great, I won't say too much about this, but I did just want to recognize that the VOREC Community Grant Program launched this week, which is super exciting. Becca's going to share more about it. There was a press release from the governor's office that went out yesterday. So lots to come with the grant program. And again, I'll let Becca talk more about that. I think the really exciting thing on a VOREC note is that we're expanding our capacity. A lot of that work is being done by Claire and the recreation team at FPR. I know we're gonna have some announcements about new staff that Becca's gonna share, but just wanted to highlight that, you know, the grant program being lifted up by FPR and the recreation team is creating capacity in my time to focus on other VOREC program work, like Move Forward Together Vermont and some other projects that we've been wanting to work on. So really exciting stuff. Oh yeah, and then the other big thing is that Move Forward Together Vermont launched at the Vermont Recreation and Parks Association conference, and we'll be digging into that this afternoon. So not too much to say there. I think I'm gonna pause there. Some other updates if you're wondering where VOREC open positions are. Please, I know that has been a topic of conversation. I'm working that forward. If you have any questions about where that is, please feel free to come chat with me. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Becca for updates from FPR.
Thanks, Jackie. I think I'll just pick up where you left off on the grants update and take this opportunity to introduce Lauren Pyle, who's on our screen, coming to us from North Carolina temporarily. She's going to be moving here to Vermont. She's our outdoor recreation program manager, the successor to Sharon. Very exciting.
Hello, it's nice to meet you all.
Feel free to take this moment, Lauren, to say a little bit more about yourself if you'd like.
Certainly. So I'm coming to you all from Western North Carolina right now in the greater Asheville area, but in about a week and a half, I will be landing in South Burlington and just ready to be excited to explore and get to know you more. So thank you all so much.
Awesome.
We're pretty excited. What this means is really the beginning of a transition that Jackie alluded to, where we're building an outdoor recreation grants team in the Forest Parks and Recreation Department that will be overseen by Claire in her role as Recreation Program Manager. So really using that opportunity to consolidate outdoor recreation grant making in a way that makes it easier for members of the community to say, I have a really good idea. Where can I find funding to help support this idea becoming a reality? Lauren will be the first of what will hopefully become a 3-person team. We have funding from the National Park Service and a request into the administration to add 2 additional positions that would become masters in the 3 different funding sources: Federal Land and Water Conservation Fund, Federal Recreation Trails, and the VOREC program. So what we hope this becomes, and we feel really confident both in our investment in the talent that Lauren represents, the way that we believe the VOREC program ties through Jackie and Claire's sort of big picture, what's happening around the state, connections are going to do a lot to really catalyze, I think, a bigger impact with our grant making. We have a lot of money to make a really big difference at a really important time in outdoor recreation in Vermont. So be on the lookout for lots of exciting accomplishments and things moving and shaking, because I think this is the beginning of a really exciting move. To that end, yes, we did announce $6 million in grant funding available. The application windows open through December 15th. Shelby has one of the posters right here. Well,
And there's more on the back table as well.
and what we're trying to do, we've gotten a lot of feedback about how to be more accessible and equitable in reaching communities, individuals, businesses that might have an interest in applying for this funding. So this is one of the tactics, going back to the good old days of when you could look for trail crews with their little tear out tabs on bulletin boards. We might have heard about that earlier this week. So our attempt is to do a lot of outreach. There are 4 tracks this time. Most of you have a role in helping us design this modernized launch of the grant program. We have outdoor equity and the partnership with the Office of Racial Equity, with project development, implementation, and we added flood recovery and resilience. This was like a convenient coincidence that we didn't launch in time for us to have settled on the tracks before the flood. And because we had the opportunity to say, we want to divert a certain amount of this funding based on what comes in for flood recovery and response projects. And kudos to our business office and our commissioner for promoting and supporting a really creative and accessible way to access those funds. If you made emergency repairs right after the flood, but you have better ideas about resilience, we will invest in the repairs that you made in an emergency way, and we will invest in that better idea. So this is just really exciting for us to know that we've been supported in making some really innovative changes to the VOREC program. And these are ideas that came from all of you, came from members of the community, came from active and past grantees. So hopefully you all feel a sense of pride and be really excited when we see the slate of applicants that come in. Do you say we have 30+ people signed up for the webinar that will be taking place next week? So we already know there's a lot of interest, but there's also a lot of money. So we're excited to see where that goes.
Is there an allocation per track or is it waves?
It's a wait and see. I think what we want to do is we want to fund as much as we can flood recovery, knowing that this is intended to be an easy way to access funds that should be invested in recovery from the flood.
Yes.
Becca, can you just clarify that there's a lot of money that is federally available money, not coming from the state, but
It is actually general fund dollars, but it was general fund dollars that became available because of ARPA funding.
Okay.
So the ARPA bill included an allocation of $5 million of surplus general fund because of all the federal funding that was coming in. And then last year, one of the other budget moves that the governor made was to provide $1 million of surplus general fund for a match. And that was intended to be targeted to rural communities. Because of the flood, because of the way that we've restructured the grant program, we felt like it made more sense for us to just bundle all that money together. There are no match requirements for the VOREC grant program. So we felt like it would be better for us to just use this grant vehicle to get as much money out the door and on the ground as possible, and elected to abandon that match concept idea for the time being. Yeah. Well, we do too, because we were like, do we have the energy to design something else? So it just was really helpful for us to have the support to add that extra $1 million. So that's why it's $6 million. And I think we want to do as much as we can in outdoor equity, but because this is new, we don't know how much we're going to see and what funding levels, but we want to be as generous in that space as possible because we know we really need to move the needle in that space. Implementation, who knows? There are a lot of great ideas out there, but the great ideas typically need a little bit of help in order for them to be ready for implementation. So it'll be really interesting to see what the composition of applications between project development and implementation look like.
Another follow-up question. So $6 million this year for the grant program. What is and you mentioned the kind of consolidation of the department and all of the funding flows. What is the total amount of state funding that's going to
State and federal money that's coming in? Landlord Conservation Fund, we get about $2.3 million a year. We split that in half and make half of it available for investments in our park system or land acquisitions. We use it to acquire land for all of our dunes. So that's like $2.3 million annually, and that's because of the Great American Outdoors Act funding, LWCF, and it's full funding capacity. The federal recreation trails program has been stagnant for a number of years. That's about $1 million that comes in, and again, we split it in half, make half of it available to invest in state lands, and then the other half is made available in competitive grants. And then we have about $100,000 that comes in from Vermont's gas tax revenue. That's the state recreation trust funding. Much of that is siphoned off to VAS to support that organization. A portion of it we use to support staff salaries, and then the remainder of it goes to competitive grants per statute. There are some requirements there. So we're looking at, in our best years, we're looking at almost $10 million going into recreation assets on state and private and local lands, which is pretty exciting. And it explains why we need to get this team of 3 working on it. Don't worry. And I think where we're headed as far as this upcoming legislative session, we've had a lot of conversations with the Trails and Greenways Council. We actually expect to and hope, and Kelly will be getting an invitation shortly to begin convening basically like policy meetings so that as the legislative session unfolds and we think about what are our priorities, where are there opportunities for us to leverage conversations about our priorities so that we can be in the right place at the right time, talking about organizational capacity needs. We want to invest in the Trails and Greenways Council being able to fully engage. We want VOBA to be able to fully engage in the way that they have demonstrated that they can. We want more sustainable funding for recreation stewardship. There was a Green Mountain Trails Fund bill last session. We want to continue to build an understanding of what's the right amount and where should that funding be directed to help the legislature identify the potential funding source for something like that. And then we want to use the Move Forward Together Vermont planning process as that North Star for both the legislature and the way the organizations that we have the legislature talking about the recreation can talk about it in the same sort of the same voice and the same vision. So pretty excited about where we're headed. What it does mean, however, is we have the $6 million that we're lifting up right now. This is funding from last fiscal year. We're currently in the FY24. We do not have $5 million in the veins at this moment to be lifting up again. So this conversation in the legislature will be a conversation about what comes next following these one-time opportunities that we've been getting so far. And with federal funds, that process seems to be driving up. I think the reality is that it's going to be a competitive field to be thinking about what we need versus what we think is right and appropriate and balanced with other social issues like the unhoused and childcare. Yeah, you can go on and on. So more to come on that, but I think the exciting thing is what does it look like for us to come together more often, more regularly, and leverage all the different ways that state government can advance policy and nonprofit organizations, lobbyists can all advance really important policy for urban recreation. And I think we're pretty far behind. So I'm going to suggest that we have an opportunity to talk about 30 by 30 maybe while we're out wandering around. I have an updated engagement plan that we have been talking about that does have some targets of when we would begin to reach out to stakeholders and members of the public about the 30 by 30 work. But right now, much of the work has been sort of internal forming, how do we want to be organized? How do we want to do the best we can do with a pretty tall order? There's a number of outcomes associated with that bill that we're trying to wrap our heads around. But I don't want to spend too much time because I think it's available at lunch or any other time to talk about what that looks like.
Great, thanks, Becca. Heather.
All right, well, it's very exciting for you, number one. So like the rest of the state, in the past 3 months post-flood, recovery has really been what the agency has been focused on. So I wanted to start with a little bit of an update on the VGAP program. So folks who recall, this is was as funding assistance to businesses who were physically damaged by the flooding. There was $20 million available. I can report that 376 businesses have been approved. There's another 115 applications that are still under review. Average award is just shy of $25,000. And 9.8 million has been committed so far of that 20 million. You folks may recall at one point there was a cap, and then there was a new cap was made that supplemental awards would be available for folks who did receive very significant damage. Those supplemental payments are actually about to go out next week. So if you happen to get this right in the part of it, I can give that update. However, all good things must come to an end. So there will be a press release going out today that the application system will be closing on October 23rd. There are still, like I said, there are still I'm not to that. Anyway, there are incomplete applications. Anybody who has an incomplete will be contacted, but if in your networks, you know of anybody who did apply and who still has an incomplete application, that will be closing on October 23rd. So please let folks know now is the time to finish that up. And so in terms of data, to answer your question, Drew, to others, the VGAP application process is one way that we've been able to gather information on how businesses were impacted. Reported total damages is 157 million. Of that, only 30 million were covered by insurance or grants or other fundraising. So that leaves 125 million of unmet need, and that's just physical damages. So I would say that the scale and scope of the disaster is still being calculated. In addition to the VGAP program as a source of data, the agency also did do an economic injury survey. This was something that I also advocated for quite strongly because there are many businesses that were impacted due to loss of traffic and other, loss of revenue that were not necessarily affected by physical damage. So we did do that survey, and I'm going to throw some numbers out at you, so I don't expect anyone to retain these, but I can follow up on it. I mean, the caveat is that this is based on 135 responses. It's not meant to be like, a complete picture, but it does help give some kind of color around the edges about what businesses were facing. And we're really looking at this. Not only will we be using this economic injury survey data with the VGAP survey data with VOBA and anybody else who collected data with all the work that Jackie did, hopefully combine that also with the agency of agriculture and so forth to be able to come with a complete picture. So that's part of it. But I think that some of the economic injury data is really important to make sure that as we are at the legislation this session and otherwise, that we can really, part of the advocating for the stress that our communities and our businesses are under. So there isn't necessarily an expectation that folks can be made whole, but at least understanding what this does to the climate for someone to run a successful business here in Vermont, or otherwise a successful enterprise maybe means being able to articulate the stress that this event has put on our businesses. That's very important.
And Heather, I also just wanted to lift up that ACCD and that economic injury survey did ask about outdoor recreation. There was an option to select if you were an outdoor recreation business, which is really great. And so I think this group can appreciate that was something that ACCD included as a sector.
Yeah, we really want to be able to look at not just outdoor recreation as a sector, what might, yes, physical more lost revenue, think of lodging as another one if it's that category and retail and so forth. So I would have to share that as that data is finalized, but just as like broad strokes, I can mention that just as an example, 40% of our respondents did not have physical damage, but still lost revenue. So 60% had physical and revenue losses, 40% were just revenue losses. The vast majority, about 46%, lost 5 to 10% of their annual revenue. But another 25% lost between 10 and 20% of their annual revenue, and 10% lost over 50% of their annual revenue.
Heather, are those losses of revenue compared fiscal year to the year prior? Is that what the question was?
Yes, I'd have to look up exactly.
Right, we're looking at for a year, but essentially it's
pretty summer to summer.
so.
So what did you make last summer versus what did you make this summer? Yeah.
Okay.
64% closed at least temporarily. 17.5% either closed permanently or unsure if they will reopen. For those businesses that closed temporarily, 58% have reopened. So you can do the math. I mean, some have not. 69% were closed for less than 2 weeks. So for the 42% that are still not reopened, over 40% do not start to reopen before December or even into 2024. So really just underscoring the point that the crisis is not over. We did, this went out in early September, and we asked folks, if they expected their revenue losses to continue. And at this point, so we were already 60 days out, post event. 60% of respondents said that yes, they expected revenue losses to continue. Of those, 35% expected loss of another 6 months. Another 30% saw losses coming for up to 6 months. Another 30% anticipate losses will continue well to 2024. So, yeah,
Well, do you have a sense of the geographic range of the respondents? Were they primarily people from within the flood zone? Did you get responses from people, outside of the flooding area? Because I think that the folks were also affected.
absolutely. So I haven't seen a map yet to see exactly how they were distributed. And I would say, these folks self-selected to report, so my guess is that these are coming from the most heavily damaged areas. But even so, I still think there's value in just sort of understanding the length of the crisis, even if it is localized. When I've been talking to the press release in terms of the impact of the flooding, I often say it was widespread and localized. So that there were very specific pockets that were very hard hit, but it wasn't just one pocket, there were numerous pockets throughout the state. At the same time, in many areas of the state that were not affected at all. So that's sort of a complication.
It seemed like there was a mental block outside of the state of Vermont that said, oh, Vermont's closed.
Yeah.
The whole state.
Yeah, you're not all that stuff. But I think that's the other thing that when we get to, we still don't have the data that I would like to see in terms of, hard numbers that we will be getting, we were able to track credit card spend in market that we get on a quarterly basis. But from November, we should have that for second quarter, that will be somewhat what we see, in terms of credit card spend compared year over year. Tax data, rooms and meals and so forth also has a delay, especially since businesses were given extra time to file. But I think part of the interesting part of that story, kind of to your point, is that, we may not see, for instance, much of a decline in the rooms and meal tax because there were emergency crews staying in our hotels, for instance. Plus we have seen, increases in average daily rates that have been steady for the last couple of years. So, higher room rate, higher, average hotel folio, higher taxes. So there's going to be interesting to kind of piece together what we're actually seeing. So we may or may not see a huge dip. And so then we'll be looking at both, localized by municipalities to kind of tease that out, as well as when we actually be able to see that credit card spend. One thing to do to try and tease out what spending is done by visitors versus, say, residents. This happens to allow us looking at credit card spend in New Hampshire. How many folks are here or just it's cross-border trade. We will look at categories of spend. So if we see folks spending and say like, car dealerships or beauty salons, that's a category we can say that's residents. You're probably not doing that on vacation. So if we see a lot of retail sales in, let's say, construction and home improvement, we may see that it's because of the flood, but not visitor spending. So anyway, more to come on data, but that's where we're up to on that. Yes, we're very aware that the whole world saw visions of downtown Montpelier with flooding up to the parking meters. We've actually kind of tracked the earned media around that, and I don't have the figure right on me, but we knew we had a lot of work to do to convince folks that Vermont was very much open. So Department of Tourism and Marketing, we did do a supplemental campaign. We did not stop our advertising, so we had $1 million campaign for summer and fall already planned. That stayed in place, but then we invested an additional $225,000 in a very much open campaign that launched over Labor Day weekend. Those tactics included, before I see on the news, digital billboards from DC, up the Eastern Seaboard. It included, digital display advertising up into Quebec. We were actually able, so we put in $225,000, but we were able to actually get in kind and other discounts from the vendors we work with for another $120,000. So really got $350 altogether in terms of what we were able to invest. We had the value of the investment we were able to make this fall to make sure that we had as robust a fall foliage season as possible. We were able to do a new 30-second TV spot, which we are using for pre-roll. We also are sponsoring a fall foliage report on one of the networks in Boston. So we can never do things like so that's kind of exciting and weird.
Heather,
Anyway, yeah.
do you want to allow some time for
Sure.
some other folks? Do you have any last big points you want to make before I move on to VTGC? I don't want to interrupt you, and I know.
I'm sorry, we just talked.
Thank you. And if you have any other questions for Heather about the work that ACCD has been doing, please find her and talk to her today. So then I'm gonna go to Vermont Trails and Greenways Council and
Yeah, I have, we just had a meeting yesterday, so I have like a very, very update for you all. We are, now that we have a part-time program administrator, we're actually able to like make some big moves. We're organizing a stakeholder survey that's gonna go out early November, be open until January, in time for us, to collect that data, sort through it, gather info, that we'll find useful for planning, future programming, because we're aiming for a Vermont Trails and Greenway in-person retreat in February. It will go out to 130 recipients on an email list. And speaking of email lists, folder. So definitely get on it if you're not already. Email me or go to our website. You can sign up. And even better than joining an email list, guys, you should become a member of our go to our website. It's and you can sign up there to be a member. The new program administrator Sharon's been keeping it up to date, super snazzy, and we actually are underway with efforts to have a total new rebrand and website, just waiting on some forward funding actually. So that's very exciting to hear afterwards. But more serious news, one of our big to-dos right now is a draft cooperative agreement between Vermont Trails and Greenway Council and Forest Parks and Rec. So a huge thank you to Claire for dedicating time. That is a crucial relationship. One of the terms of that relationship that we want to like start jumping into, diving into, would be modernizing the Vermont Trails system. So we actually have starting on a draft modernization roadmap that we look forward to presenting it, for their consideration. And I was thrilled with Becca's update because that was included in mine as well, is that we feel really strongly to be in step with FPNR, especially as we head into the 2024 legislative session. And Becca already spoke to it, but both supporting the general aspirations of that H467, which was that Green Mountain Recreation Fund that Becca spoke to. So we're drafting a letter to present to FPNR about thoughts and feelings on that bill, and any problematic areas that we see, areas that we support. But I don't want to speak to that right now because we just presented it to Vermont Trails and Greenway Council yesterday, and I'm hoping to be in agreement before we bring it forward to the department. And then finally, last thing is, VTGC has invited anyone. I actually encourage everyone here to attend, but we've invited legislators to join us October 19th at 9 a.m. in Pulteney at Slate Valley Trail House. Also visiting the bike shop, Porcupine Bike Shop there. And the goal of that day is, Pulteney, after losing Green Mountain College, how the entire community shifted.
we had a big presentation.
Basically, we're gonna put our economic resiliency into and dedicating a lot of effort to recreation, connecting it to the town. So we thought it would be a really wonderful community example for legislators to see that by investing in the Green Mountain Recreation Fund, that bill, that they can do good things. So thanks, Jane. Great.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna go to Kelly for an update from the Vermont Outdoor Business Alliance.
Thank you for creating an update. Some of the relationships and work that we've been doing has already been mentioned. It's great to work with so many organizations and coalitions here. I'm just going to touch base on 3 areas of our work, and I'm excited about some of the networking time we have today to get into some further discussions with everyone. But I think the most exciting, assuming I'll have my shameless plug around the Outdoor Autonomy Summit. That is the big event that is happening on November 2nd. We're really excited about
Must attend.
the must attend, don't miss. You will have FOMO if you do. It is scheduled for 10 to 5 at Hula in Burlington. And we are anticipating 125 stakeholders from around the state, businesses, organizations, funders, service providers, policymakers. We have a really strong agenda coming together as a series of forums, panel discussions, and speakers. We're kicking off the day with some workshops on the action planning, moving forward Vermont together.
Forward together, Vermont.
Moving forward.
It's gonna take a little time.
So Claire and Jackie will facilitate an hour and 15-minute workshop in the morning, similar to what was presented at the Trail Symposium in September. So that would be a really exciting way for businesses to engage in that process. And then at the same time, we're having a session on conservation, recreation, and business collaboratives, focusing on 30 by 30 as an organizing opportunity, but also looking at some other partnerships that we can have together as stakeholder groups. So that would be pretty exciting. We have Montreal Greenways Council and FOREC partnership members speaking. Shelby is one of those members of Montreal Greenways, and we'll be talking more about how to involve in that workshop. Hopefully we can adjourn it in time. Also, that we are excited to have the governor invited to speak. We hope to hear of his acceptance any minute now. That would be the beginning of the main program for the afternoon. We do have a closing speaker confirmed. That is Mike Check, our state treasurer, who invited VOBA to be part of the rating agency meeting several months ago, and was really part of positioning Vermont and our industry as being a fast-growing economy, a very resilient economy. And so I think you can speak to some of the promise for our sector to continue to grow and be a driver of local community economic development. So that's exciting. Our afternoon workshops and our opening panel are just filled with folks from the state, folks from the business community, organizations. We'll have a session on building the workforce and climate resilient businesses. We'll have one on marketing to grow outdoor businesses, featuring some of our manufacturers that have been positioning their brands. And then a policy session to talk about some of the issues that we'll be working on this coming year. So I'll transition to that next. And after this meeting or during this meeting, I'll make sure you have the registration information to sign up. But our policy work will continue moving into the legislative session. We're just beginning to frame some of those priorities, but the board of directors has really looked at kind of 4 areas as being a focus for our work in our this session, as well as our collaborations. And that is really engaging in the 30 by 30 process. We want to be stakeholders and be able to weigh in as an industry on some of the opportunities, some of the plans and the processes that are going to be designed by A&R and VTGC. Outdoor industry was identified as one of the stakeholders in the bill. So we'll be working with businesses on supporting their voice and their engagement in that process. Climate resiliency, the packages that will be discussed in the legislature, in commerce, and in other committees. So we'll be working on bringing businesses to talk about how investments in climate resiliency for business is a pretty important investment and set of policy changes that can help the outdoor sector moving forward. The PFAS bill, which passed the Senate last year and is now going to be in the House, and that is really looking at removing certain chemistries from gear or apparel and accessories on a timeline that works for industry. And this is a national movement where bills are being passed in states, and that will really affect many of our manufacturers in this state. And then the recreation omnibus bill and some of the proposals for stewardship, accessibility, community investments will be part of that conversation. So we're excited to be a partner, and we'll have some lobbying support this year, which is new, and looking forward to the conversations moving forward. I guess the last little note is around a VOREC project update and an exciting initiative that we've launched this fall. And part of our VOREC grant was to support business development and technical assistance to a cohort of outdoor businesses, and focused on the gear and apparel manufacturing network, because we have inventoried our companies in the state, and we have close to 50 outdoor manufacturers. Over 30 of whom are small and emerging. And so we have many companies who are really innovative, really exciting, really based in our outdoor communities that are the future speedos and hopefully future gun clubs and horses someday. And so our work is to support their technical assistance and resource needs with our VOREC funds, a portion of our VOREC funds over the next 6 to 8 months to really help them get a leg up or on some of their business goals. A couple of the ways we're doing that are concrete include we're supporting consultations and workshops on business development topics with a selected group of 13. And our advisory committee has helped kind of design a process. We've designed some criteria and a focus for these workshops and consultations. And in addition to having some small group specific workshops, half-day workshops with a handful of companies on strategy and strategy execution to help them really move to the next level in their business planning. We're also supporting some consultations and support for the marketing, the marketing preparation work and planning, and also access to some retail marketing. Two of the exciting ones on our plate are a group booth at the Snowbound Expo in Boston in early November, where we're bringing 6 brands to under one collaborative booth. These companies have never been to a trade show, never been to the Snowbound Expo, and so we're providing the support there and helping them prepare to get exposure to the trade show world and figure out how they navigate retail connections as well as direct-to-consumer connections. And then we're planning the 3rd annual Gear Makers Festival in the spring. Last year it was called at Ranch Camp, which is close to 30 companies as vendors and close to 300 people walk the festival. And we're planning an even bigger show this spring. So we will definitely engage all of you in that to really elevate and showcase some of our Vermont-made companies and tell their story about their connection in Vermont, and also their connections. They're also their unique business models, whether they're female founded or working on sustainable innovation or many other exciting technologies and modernization of products moving forward. So a lot of updates. I'm happy to talk more, and thank you all for the support.
Can you say a 60-second business?
60 seconds.
6 seconds.
Because I want to give folks calling it.
100%. Just like a quick update from the national outdoor business scene, which relates to Vermont. I think just sort of clear the air, we did have news this month about Sam's in Brattleboro closing stores, which got a lot of press, a lot of hand-wringing. What's gone on? It's been a very successful business and the anchor in that town for a long time. Those stores, obviously very concerning. At the same time, in the last month, we did receive an announcement that Mavic, which is an international company known for bicycle componentry, is moving to Waterbury, Vermont, specifically because of the culture and the outdoor recreation infrastructure assets. It's definitely a mixed bag. One of my clients that I work with nationally is a group of small independent outdoor retailers around the country. And data from them shows that it is a mixed bag out there. It's about 50% up, 50% down. But that's based on last year, which was a record year for virtually every retailer in the country. And so when you see numbers being down this year, always, specifically in outdoor recreation, always remember the post-pandemic years were massive. Those were record-setting years. And so compare things to last year, just keep it, there. And the same thing about retailers closing. Every time a retailer closes, 1,000 reporters go in and report on it. When retailers successfully transition, nobody does coverage of it. Among my client who has this group of retailers around the country, 10% of their retailers have gone through successful ownership transition in the last 2 years. Once again, this is something that typically happens under the radar. These stores are being bought by new people, young people, the next generation of outdoor retail specialty owners. So there is lots of reason to be optimistic, particularly with the small companies that are coming up. energetic young people, and VOBA's doing great work in trying to bring those people forward. So just my quick 2 cents there.
Thanks, Drew.
Is that
So I'm going to start to wrap us up because we do have the town of Randolph joining us and we're a little bit over time. And I want to give them as much time as possible to present and spend time with us. Before I do that, I just want to pause and ask if there's any questions from folks in the room. And then I want to just give folks who are joining us virtually or sitting in back of us here the opportunity to give public comments. So any questions from steering committee members on business meeting updates? Great. Then I'm going to go to public comment and I'm going to start with folks joining us virtually. If you have any comments or questions on what we've discussed here this morning, now is your time to chime in. All right, and hearing none, I'm going to go to folks here in the room in back of us. Any questions or comments on what we discussed during the business meeting? All right, great. So with that, I think I'm going to adjourn our business meeting and we're going to move to the town of Randolph. For folks joining us online virtually, thank you so much for being here. We're going to end the virtual portion of this meeting, but really appreciate you spending time with us this morning. Good to see you, Lauren.
Bye, Lauren. Bye, Molly. For nonprofit and environmental.